So we're going to have this presentation from Frederick and
Jochen. Jochen.
Jochen.
that one. So, gentlemen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jochen. I know it's a difficult name to say for lots of people. I don't blame you. That's totally fine.
At least your name is not Eichhörnchen.
Eichhörnchen. Right. I'm a long-term contributor to OSM. I've mostly done software development, so that's where some of you might know me from. I'm doing, for instance, the Osmium software framework, and I'm also the developer of Tag Info. But today, I'm not going to talk about any software development stuff at all. We'll talk about something else with Frederick.
Jochen said he wanted to do a philosophical talk on OpenStreetMap, and I said, well, your beard is not long enough for that, but let's give it a try. My name is Frederick. I know Jochen from University Times in Karlsruhe, and I've also been... Actually, I started with OSM because of Jochen. I remember Jochen said, I'm starting to do this thing where you can do mapping, but the editor is crap. Can you help out? And I had some limited Java skills at the time, so I did some JOSM development then. Okay, yeah.
Let's get started.
Maybe let's get started, yeah.
OpenStreetMap, everybody knows, an international open collaborative project to map the world. I don't have to tell you. Everybody can add, modify, delete everything they want. And what it's not is not just a random collection of information that lots of people collect for their use. It's not like so much of social media, a collection of divergent views of the world, but it's a collaborative endeavor to create one single view of the world, where we're all working together and have this shared combined, I'm just saying the same thing here again, map, and what's behind is obviously a database of the world. And so with everybody being allowed to edit everything, to change everything, to delete everything, how does that work? How do we reach this common view? We're not in a room together all discussing and saying, this street here has this name, or this street should be a one-way street. And then once we agree, all the 2 million people or so who have mapped, we all agree, then we put it on the map. Somehow, this common view emerges out of what we are doing. And this is what we want to discuss today. So this is very much an open discussion. This is sort of, we're showing a bit sort of the view that we have, how this works or might work, or how we understand it to work. And we had some discussions beforehand, Frederick and me, because we also have different ideas and views how all of this work. And I'd be very much interested in your views also. And we've seen this as a sort of one piece in a discussion that we should go on having again and again to understand what we are doing and reflect on that, and then maybe improve also things, obviously. To the end also, we have a volunteer in the room. If you ask questions in Venuless now, she'll look at them and maybe ask them during the talk, so we don't have to wait all the way to the back to the end of the talk. So feel free to put things in Venuless while we're talking. Obviously, there will also be time at the end there.
There used to be a time when the medium where all these things were decided was the mailing list, the one mailing list that there was, OSM Talk. I think it's probably dead by now.
Pretty much so, I think.
Yeah. So most people use the community forum nowadays. But what we want to discuss is not really, of course, there are various ways for community members to discuss, and they are all important. But our talk is about basically the foundational ideas that help people to decide what they want to map and what they should maybe not.
So, and obviously, if you talk that, we have to talk about the on-the-ground rule. I mean, it was in the title of our talk, so no big thing there. And the on-the-ground rule is really more of a guideline. I assume that most of you know what the on-the-ground rule is, or have a vague idea, at least, what this is. But there are so many different interpretations, and we want to go through some of these. So this is just some random photo. I had some street, and it's kind of obvious if you want to map that. There's buildings there. There's a road there. I mean, you can see the buildings have colorful facades. I can
almost see a street name on that sign there.
There's a sign there. I think it says Karl Hoffmann Street or something. So, so it's kind of obvious. I think we would all in this room would agree how to basically map this road and the buildings around it. So that's easy. There's something we can see there, and I don't see there will be a lot of discussion. There's always discussion on the details, but in broad terms, this is an easy case. This is a more complicated case.
We don't map airplanes. No.
We don't map airplanes. So
no.
But why don't we map airplanes?
Because they fly away.
Oh, because they fly. That makes sense. So the airplane flies away, but then there's another airplane coming, and a little bit later there's another one and another one, and for some reason they're always there at this place, and that's because that's an airport. I mean, you can't see the airport, but it is there. So this is in Canada, Victoria, and that's just one airport that they have, and it's obviously for water planes, and they always land in the same place, and you could almost draw an outline of an airport in there, but it's not visible there. So even on the ground rule might say you have to you agree on things that you see, and that's what you map. You can't see the airport, but you can still map it because you can infer from the airplanes landing there, and there will also be a sign somewhere maybe, and there will and there's schedules, and there's a website that says, okay, there's an airport there, and there's a security control point or a point where the boats then land or so. You can still, I think, agree that there's an airport there. I'm not sure whether I would map the landing strip though.
I think there are people who have actually drawn landing strips on water in OpenStreetMap. It's an interesting. You can probably figure that out with overpass query or something like that.
Yeah, every landing strip that's on water, I've seen it. Yeah, it's not in Victoria, but there's other places that have that. This is another simple case. There's the Malahat Summit, and it has the elevation, so it's very easy to tag. There's a name on it, and it has an elevation, so we can tag that. Also, we can see that it must be North America because somebody has been shooting at the sign.
But then the elevation is given in meters and not in feet, so...
That's why you know it's in Canada.
Ah, right, okay.
Clever, huh? But in many cases, you look at something like this, and there's no sign. There's no sign on all these mountains there, what they are named, or of every crevice in there and every rock or whatever, they're not named. I don't know whether there's a sign somewhere that says that this is the River Elbe. So it gets a bit more complicated. What are we going to do then if there's no signs?
Put some signs up. There are actually situations where people have done that, and they've just named the place in OSM, give them some fantasy name, and someone has said, well, can you prove that this place actually has this name? And then they put the name up. No, but obviously you're just going to, either you know the place or you can ask the locals.
And hopefully they agree on the names of all the mountains and all that. But mostly they will, probably. There's always somebody who has a different idea or so, but generally if you ask the people around in some local area, they will know what things are called, what this or that thing is, and so you can get by there. It gets more difficult, obviously. This is sort of the same area, but from area photo. So if you are not local and you can't go out there and ask somebody, if you're doing remote mapping,
I'll stand on this side because there are people sitting there and I'm obstructing their view. There's no one sitting here, so...
Very clever. Now the camera has to move. So if you have a satellite image or an aerial photography, there's a limit to what you can map. And we all know that you can map some things, you might see some things, but other things you can't detect. It's not only names that you don't see, but you often can't see sort of what exactly the type of road is, or all of these things. So it's important to have the local community, to have sort of the connection to the local community, and all that. Now we're getting in a difficult thing. So this is a border stone. So it is a stone marking the border between two different areas, whatever they are. It's easy if you want to know the boundary between, I don't know, Kenya and Uganda or something. Is there a boundary between the two? Then we just look for those stones, and we go through the bush or whatever where this is, and look for the stones, and then we can map the boundary.
Obviously, yeah, there will always be boundary markers everywhere.
So this is obviously, I mean, we all know this is a problem. We can't do that everywhere. In a lot of places, there might be a fence, or there might be boundary markers or something. But even if there are boundary markers, then there's one here, and then a kilometer down there, there's another one, and we don't know exactly sort of where the boundary goes. But again, we can ask the locals, and the locals should know. They should know whom they are paying taxes to that country or that country. Generally, this is still applies. If you ask the people, they'll know to which country or county or city or whatever this area belongs to, and of course there are problems with that, and we all know that. But generally, this still applies, and that doesn't break the on-the-ground rule. You can ask.
I mean, in reality, obviously, many boundaries in OpenStreetMap have not been surveyed on the ground, but instead they have been imported from third data sources. But if there should be a dispute between two mappers and OSM, and one person says this boundary is wrong, then they could basically ask the locals and ask them, hey, as you said, which country are you paying taxes to, or what uniforms do the policemen and women wear on this side of the border, or whatever.
And also, it's sometimes, even if you import the data and the boundary is like in the middle of a stream or something, and the stream is now somewhere else, and you see that on the aerial imagery, or if you are there, you can correct that boundary. Depends on exactly where boundaries are defined, and it's a huge area of discussion, obviously. But yeah, the general rule still applies, I think. There's a different issue, or a different aspect of the on-the-ground rule is we are mapping facts, and we are mapping the facts as they are now, and not as they were yesterday, or as they might be tomorrow, or as somebody wants them to be tomorrow. So this, for instance, it's an old monastery. It used to be a monastery, but now it's just ruins. So you map it as ruins and not as a monastery. You might map it as a tourism attraction also, or some other things. But you think about sort of what is it now, and not what it used to be. So,
yeah, there's an interesting. Sometimes, depending on which language you're speaking, many languages have this thing of you can say something in English. Say, this is a former monastery. Which is kind of wrong, because you say it is something, and then you say it's a former something. You're basically saying it was a monastery and it is something else now, but you're using a language construct that implies it is something, and then you use the word monastery, and then people want to sort of map it as a monastery, which is it not. It is ruins, or maybe a tourist attraction. Yeah.
There was a good idea in the Q&A session of the ID talk earlier that somebody said we could, every time we delete something in OpenStreetMap, there should be an option to immediately transfer it to the Open Historical Map. And those people, I mean, they have their own, completely own system, but it's based on OpenStreetMap technology and all that, but they keep the old data around, and they can say, okay, in whatever Roman times there was this road here or so, and but we don't do that. We keep to what's there now, which helps us to agree on things, because if you start to think about what was there yesterday or 10 years ago or 100 years ago, then it becomes awfully complicated, and it's not obvious to sort of a normal person standing there what might have been there 100 years ago.
So has anyone ever seen a sign like that? Right, so, but we do have postcodes in OpenStreetMap, postcode areas, at least in those countries which have postcode areas. So there seem to be some things that we actually map in OpenStreetMap which are not visible on the ground and hard to sort of determine. And so there must be some extra rule, something that refines the on the ground rule, and that lets us decide whether we should map something like a postcode area.
I mean, we could always say we don't map postcode areas, we just say this house has this postcode. And we could check that and agree on that, because if you send any mail to that postcode and that address, and if it turns up in that letterbox of that house, then that was the right address and the right postcode. And then all the houses that have the same postcode, we could figure that out and make an area from it. But we often do map the area just because it's much simpler to use the data in that way. If we have areas instead of hundreds of points that first have to be aggregated. So this is just sort of one example. So as Frederick said, there's something else that we maybe have to take into account here. And we think it is something called importance. And that's a vague term. And so let's talk about this a bit more. We have all different interests and focus on different priorities when we are mapping. Some people are mapping streets, some people are mapping buildings, some people are mapping post boxes, some people are mapping postcode areas. That's all fine. But there is, I think, mostly a shared understanding on importance of the basic features, not of all the details, but of the basic features. About the environment that we navigate every day and that influences all that we are doing. I mean, streets and paths that we are walking on or driving on, and buildings are important to all of us. It doesn't matter where we are and what other things we find important or not important. There are some things which are kind of obviously more important than others in general. And so just one simple example, I think we would all agree, maybe somebody does not agree, but all agree that it's more important to map a forest than to map a specific tree. There might be cases where that's not the case. Maybe the tree has some cultural or historical importance or so, but then we are not mapping the tree as a tree, but as a monument or something. But generally, it's more important to say, okay, there's a huge forest there than to map one specific tree. Here's another example. So in this case, what is happening here, you see some kind of place and there's some kind of market going on. But you don't know from this image, is this a market that happens every day there? Is this a marketplace? Or is this a parking lot and once a year they have a market there? So just from the image you can't decide, but if you live there, you can understand and you have some context that you need here. In this case, it looks to me like this is probably a market. There's a market every day. And this is a different one. Here, that's some kind of outdoor exhibition of some art. This is probably something that happens once a year, or I don't know, once a quarter. The art society is putting up in the park there. So you're not going to map the unimportant thing here. This is not a gallery, an art gallery or something, but you're mapping that this is a park.
There's actually an interesting tree that I could maybe map.
You could, yeah. It's a nice tree.
So yeah, I mean, it's one important question when you ask yourself whether something is important. One question is how temporary is it, or how permanent? If there is a marketplace where a market takes place once a week or something, then it is relatively it's a permanent feature of society, whereas this is probably not.
And then there's things which are probably not important at all unless you're a duck.
It's an important feature to duck society.
Yeah, so this is a thing where ducks can get out of this fountain thing there. Otherwise, they would never get out. But it's mobile. You can see that you can take it away. So it's probably too small to map. It's not important for OpenStreetMap. If somebody would start mapping those, still okay. I'm not saying this is not allowed. But I'm just trying to illustrate that there is a hierarchy. There's things that are more important than others. Oops, no, I've gone too far. Another thing when you're thinking about importance and about temporary thing is sometimes you see people using an aerial image and mapping something like this, where a river meets the ocean in excruciating detail. But you know that with every tide, with every high tide, with every low tide, every time there's a rainstorm and the river has more water in it, the exact form of the river will change. So the important part is mapping the river as it is and not sort of where each sand corn is. So for importance, it is important to see how permanent something is and how much detail makes sense for this kind of feature. And this is not the same everywhere. So in Kibera, a tap where you can get water is obviously a very important feature for the community. And it's in other places, it's nice that you can get some water by the roadside maybe. But if everybody has water and clean water in their house, then this is not such an important feature. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. And it changes over time. So when we started mapping 20 years ago, we would map something like this as, okay, there's a road there, done. And nowadays we say, okay, there's a road and it has 3 lanes and there's different kinds of ways for bicycles and pedestrians, and you can turn here and all that. So we get to more.
And the pavement on the cycleway is this and that kind of pavement and so on.
Yeah, and so this importance thing helps us to decide if something. So our argument here is a bit like if something is more important, we are willing to bend the on the ground rule some more than if we have something that's less important. So for something like boundaries between countries, they are so important for so many things that we are doing and for so many maps we want to show them. We have to find a way of doing that. And we can't say, you can't see that on the ground. We don't do that. So the on the ground rule generally says you have to see it, or you can agree on it if you ask people on the ground. But even if that's difficult, we are willing to sometimes let it go anyway. What about this? Is this
It's
important?
clearly important because it's a rare species of bird.
Yeah,
Many people devote half of their study life to that.
Yeah, and there's protected bird, and it's important to know where they nest and all that.
And it's also not temporary because they tend to reuse their nests.
But sometimes there are limits to what we are mapping, only because something might be important or we might be interested in that. There's always this other thing which we shouldn't forget, and we don't want to go into too many details, but there are sometimes legal limitations, or if there are no legal limitations, there are at least sort of ethical limitations. Sometimes it makes sense to not map something, because in that case, people will come and steal the eggs if it's easy to find them. So this would be one example of things we don't map. So sometimes it makes sense to think about this and not map something because it would lead to more problems. And also there's technical limitations. Our data model has its limits. We are always pushing the boundaries with boundary relations. But there are things where we have problems like with 3D mapping. It's very interesting how much 3D mapping we can do now in OpenStreetMap with the data model that we have, but we don't have a fully 3D able data model, or we don't have LiDAR data that we can store on OpenStreetMap or any of those things. So there are obviously also technical limits, but this is not what we're talking here today. So what does that mean in practice? When we are out mapping, we think about the on-the-ground rule. Should we do something? Can we see it? Can we infer it if we can't see it? Would everybody agree who is on the ground there? If we'd ask a few people and half of them they say this and half of them say that, then maybe we can't map it that way. So that's the first thing. Then also think about the importance a bit. How important does it seem to you? How important might it be for others? How permanent is it? What is a suitable level of detail? And then always, is there a reason maybe not to map it? If in doubt, talk to the community. I mean, this is not something that we do alone. I mean, most of the mapping is done alone. You go out mapping yourself, or you sit in front of your computer and have some aerial images that you're mapping from. But there are lots of other people in the community, and if you're not sure, you can always ask them and then get in a discussion and go through this. If somebody already maps something and you think this is wrong, it's probably a good idea to not immediately delete it and say, oh, this is against the on-the-ground rule, but discuss it first. Maybe take a deep breath first. If it's so that you don't get in a heated argument, try to see sort of their side, and mostly it doesn't matter. I mean, if there's something in there that should not be in OpenStreetMap and it's there for 3 days, that's not a huge problem. I mean,
can I say something about abandoned railways?
You can.
It's one of the big things in Germany, well, at least some other countries as well, but Germany has lots of fans of the railways, and obviously not all the railways that ever were there are still here. So some have been removed, and sometimes you will have some railway expert who looks at something that to me looks like a trail in the forest. And they say, oh, I can see from the curvature and from the way that the ground is prepared that this must be a former railway. And then they go to OpenStreetMap and they map this abandoned railway, which is a bit like what I said before. This is a former monastery. Like an abandoned railway is not a railway anymore. It's now, today, it's a forest track. Maybe it was a railway once. And there is lots of discussion. Sorry, I'm not sure here. Yes. There's lots of discussion on whether how much needs to be visible of this abandoned railway. As I said, there are some people who see this, how the ground is made up, and they say clearly an abandoned railway. For me to see an abandoned railway, I would actually have to see some actual remains of something that I can identify and say, okay, this looks like a railway. Difficult questions, and it's often difficult for the community to come to satisfactory answers. Lots of strife, but as we already mentioned and mentioned in the talk before, Open Historical Map can be an interesting way out, because anyone who's a huge fan of ancient railways can add stuff to Open Historical Map where it can be preserved. And in OpenStreetMap, we would tend to map something that is today used as a forest trail, and not as an abandoned railway.
Yeah, but there's obviously no one-size-fits-all solution. We always have to use common sense, and that also goes back to what Frederick says. Common sense is what people have in common, and if there's this one railway enthusiast who sees things differently, maybe that's not as important as what lots of people think and see, and when they look at the area there. But we always also have to leave some room for new ideas and experiments. I mean, OpenStreetMap is only where it is now because people always push the boundaries and map something that other people had said, you should never map that, or you can't map that, and that will never work, and all that. So it is okay to have experiments and to occasionally map something that other people are not mapping, and all that, and maybe try it out in some area, talk to people and say, okay, what do you think about this, and so on. And also trust the community process. We have seen that it works with every mapper that is improving them, or that is working on the map improves. This is not, the one mapper doesn't have to be perfect because he or she is the only one doing whatever they are doing in this particular area, but there's others. So there's always somebody else who can do the next step and do a little improvement and a little addition and all that. And that brings us to the conclusion. So the on-the-ground rule, it talks about what you can see on the ground or what you could agree on when you are standing there on the ground, but that actually rarely happens. I don't know how many cases you know where you met with somebody else on the ground. Sometimes at a mapping party or some kind of event, you do that. If you introduce new mappers or so, you do that. But in sort of normal mapping practice, most of the time you do it for yourself and you don't have to do that. But you could always. There's always the theoretical possibility, or there could be practical possibility of doing that. The on-the-ground rule, it makes the data verifiable. Somebody else can come in and say, okay, check, I checked what this guy has been doing. It avoids conflicts and it can solve conflicts because you're not mapping something that might be there or that will be there in the future or that you want to be there or that you want to be there for some marketing reason or whatever it is.
This is actually, I don't know how many of you are maybe also active in Wikipedia or maybe have some Wikipedia history. And this is one of the huge differences between OpenStreetMap and a project like Wikipedia, because in OpenStreetMap, we all agree that we want to record the on-the-ground truth. And if we can't agree on something, then in most cases we can say, let's meet there and look at the thing, and then we can figure out who of us is right. And this is much more difficult in Wikipedia, because in Wikipedia you often, if it's an article about something to do with history or culture or something, whether a certain band is perceived as playing this genre of music or another genre or whatever, it's super difficult. You actually have to find lots of resources. You basically have to do an academic kind of work where you find sources that bolster your own opinion, and you can then say, okay, I have these citations that I can make, and this is why I put this in. And in OpenStreetMap, you don't have citations. In Wikipedia, they do not want original research. They want you to have sources for citations. Whereas in OpenStreetMap, we want original research. We want you to go to the place and to record what you see.
Right, so it avoids spam, it avoids the marketing people who come in and say, okay, this is the greatest restaurant in the world and they have the most amazing food or something, because that's not a fact, that's not something everybody would agree on, maybe who's standing there. So it keeps us honest, and I think what's also very important, it empowers the local community. Without the local community, with the people who can actually go there, or the people you can talk to, OpenStreetMap can never be complete. And if there's a disagreement between somebody who is actually there and somebody who is miles away, usually the person who's actually there would win that argument by the on-the-ground rule. So this on-the-ground rule is a tool for building this consensus without actually talking to all of the community, just by mapping, keeping the on-the-ground rule in mind, we are building this consensus in our distributed community. and the map tends to converge to a common understanding of the real world. If there's somebody who maps something that's not there, somebody else will see that sooner or later and change it. And the more different something is from the real world, the more incentive there is, and there are more people in our community will edit it and will change it. While if something that looks okay to everybody and looks good to everybody will not be changed because it's okay. So there is a natural way of converging towards this ground truth. And we think this is the basis of sort of all our success in OpenStreetMap, that we have this rule. Not all our success, but a lot of our success is that we have this rule and that we don't allow anybody to map anything they want, but stick to the facts and to the underground rule. Thank you.
All right, we would be happy to have a little bit of discussion with you, and maybe one or two of you have mapped something in the past where they asked themselves, is this, how should this be mapped? Should this not be mapped? Should I exercise caution, whatever? Or maybe someone has been involved in a conflict with some other mapper about something like that. And we have more than enough time to maybe discuss the odd example and see what people think about it.
All right, thank you so much. We have lots of questions. The first one is, how do we map sea and air routes?
How do you
map
Sea and
air routes?
sea and air routes. We do not map air routes at all. It's actually discouraged. There is a nice explanation on the wiki about that. Sea routes, we do map ferry lines, and these are often actually mapped by people who traveled on a particular ferry with their GPS on, and then they just recorded that. It is a bit of a problem because obviously the ferry could take another route when it travels the same distance the next day, but most ferries tend to stick to the same route, so they are relatively okay.
This one says, most boundaries do not change when a stream changes. Not sure if that's a question.
Yeah, there's different rules in different cases. Sometimes when the boundary is defined by like the middle of the stream or something, in some cases it is defined to be where the stream actually is, and if the stream changes, the boundary changes. And in other cases, it was defined at some historical point to be in the middle of the stream, and the stream changes and the boundary does not change. There's different cases in different places of the world, and you would have to know in those cases which one applies. Yeah.
The other one.
Can I add something? There's even a technical way in which you can put that into OpenStreetMap. If you know that the center line of the stream is actually the boundary, and when the stream changes, then the boundary changes, then you can actually make that river in OpenStreetMap a part of the administrative boundary. So you can explicitly record the fact that these two are identical. And if it's only a coincidence that the boundary and the river are currently in the same place, and if the river changes, then the boundary will stay the same, then you would record two individual geometries in OpenStreetMap to make sure that those can be edited independently.
All right. A lot of the assumptions we make when you try to encode spatial information are shaped by tools built for cadastral systems. But understandings of ownership or location aren't actually as universal as that. We are also dealing with increasingly fuzzy concepts, e.g. neighborhoods. Are there any examples you know of which have successfully dealt with these kinds of complex geometries?
I haven't, it was a long question.
Something about complex geometries.
Maybe if you could let me read it. No, I can't without glasses. You have to. mean, it's not like Jochen and I are the people who decide these things. We just try to say something about what we know that the community has discussed in the past.
Yeah. So the question was about sort of fuzzy things, and we left this out of the. Something is beeping. Computer says we have to stop. So we thought about putting this in the talk, but didn't put it in. There is a problem with fuzzy things, and this is so fuzzy things like a mountain range or something. Where does it stop? Where does it begin? What exactly is the area that we call these mountains, or the whatever the Atlantic Ocean? Where exactly is the definition where it stops? Or a neighborhood or something. There are, and I think this is one of those cases where we have technical limitations in OpenStreetMap. We have no way of saying this is roughly this area, and there's some kind of, but the boundary is fuzzy, and this is certainly something where we should think about at some point, or we could think about how to improve that and how to maybe find a way of mapping these kind of fuzzy things. I hope this answers the question.
It's you could call this the dilemma of precision, because in OSM we can only map with high precision. We cannot say, oh, generally this area is generally called the Black Forest, but we have to record the precise boundary of the Black Forest, and it's not always easy. It's also the same with something like long distance bus relations or something. You know that the bus starts at the Nairobi, someplace in Nairobi at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then travels 10 hours overground to some other place where it will usually be at 8 in the evening or something. You can't, if you want to record that route in OpenStreetMap, you actually have to precisely add all the segments of road that this bus is going to take, which in practice is silly because the bus will probably alter the path it takes depending on congestion or other features, other situations. So that is a problem in OpenStreetMap, and solutions can probably be found and should be discussed.
All right. Can the work as a rule if it's not the exclusive rule? Is it still work if it's the strongest rule? If there is conflict with other rules and the decision is...
As you said earlier, I think the on-the-ground rule is not a rule really, it's a guideline. And so it has to stand next to other things that we also think about, like the importance. It is a guideline that helps us understand the situation and come to a common decision and all that, but it's not the only thing, and there's never a clear border between good and bad or something, and there's never a perfect solution.
OpenStreetMap attracts a lot of very technical-minded people who would like to have a very clear rule and a very clear algorithm where they can just say, okay, I'm just going to follow these 5 steps and then I have the correct answer. And it's like most things in real life, it's not that easy. So sometimes you just have to do something like maybe survey a couple of your peers in OpenStreetMap and see what they think, and then some, and it may also be different, as we said, different in different regions, or something that we didn't do yesterday, we might be doing today. So, it's a project that's run by humans. What do you expect?
Are there temporal tags in OSM, such as for a recurring market?
Temporary tags for only, there are some ways of saying, for instance, a road is closed in the winter, or a road is closed every March because next to it there's some animals breeding or something, and you are not allowed to disturb them in this nature reserve or something like that. So there are ways of doing that. They're not very popular yet, but it's more and more people are adding these kind of sort of conditional, it's called then conditional access and conditional colon whatever. I would expect that we'll see more of that, and then that this will get extended to more and more things, like a market, and say, okay, this is a parking lot here, Monday to Friday, and on Saturday it's a market or something like that. I don't think there's really very good ways of doing that yet, and not many people will actually, I mean, it's difficult to then put something like this on a map. How do you display that on a map? But this is, I think, one of those areas where OpenStreetMap is currently pushing the boundaries and trying out new things, and there's already some like apps for hiking and so on, which will take these things into account. So I think we'll see more and more of that.
There is a very popular festival in the US called the Burning Man. It's somewhere in the desert. And I think the current agreement in the US community is that they actually delete that from OSM because the festival is, I think it only takes a week or something. I don't know. Does anyone know? So it's a short time, but it's recurring. It happens every year. And it actually consists of lots of temporary roads and temporary spaces. And people do map that on OSM, but they then delete it when the festival is over. And they just keep the files locally so that they can then basically upload it with changes next year if required. But I mean, other ways could be found to do that, and we don't know what will happen in the future.
Someone here says, can we get another comedy duo like this too next year? Okay. Please, can you create a version of OSM with no rules, like the pre-2010 days, when I could do what I want because nobody in my part of the world was looking at the map? Flying monkey. Should OpenStreetMap have any rules? Do we need a process for amending rules, like approval of votes on the wiki?
I don't think we can have a process for creating rules that involves some kind of voting, because then who's going to vote? And there's 2 million people who have contributed to OpenStreetMap. Are we going to ask all of them? That's clearly not something that's going to work. And most of these people are actually probably not interested in all of the rules. So I think we have a process that does work and has brought us here. In the end, people are voting with their mouse and their fingers or whatever. When all of you are mapping and you follow rules, then you do that because you sort of implicitly, you are agreeing to the rule and you follow that. And if you don't follow that rule and nobody follows that rule, then that rule doesn't matter anymore. Nobody can force you to do something by the rule, because you're all volunteers and you're all doing this on your own time, and there's nobody standing behind you with a gun or saying you have to do this or that. And this will never be the case. So we are all voluntarily following the rules.
There's that, and there are lots of tools that process OpenStreetMap data. So of course, I mean, if you add something to the map and give it some silly tag that no one knows, it will not appear on the rendered map. So the benefit is maybe for you is rather small, because you want to contribute to this shared thing and you want to see your stuff on the map. Or if you add some special features to a road, but the routing engine doesn't consider the features, then it doesn't have an impact, right? Everyone wants their mapping and their work to have an impact. If you want an OpenStreetMap without any rules or with very few rules, there is a project called Open Fictional Map, which is not about the truth or the facts or on the ground stuff, but about fiction. And you can basically reserve a spot for you there, and you can do any mapping that you want. And it actually uses this very similar backend to OpenStreetMap, so you will be familiar with the tools being used there. So if you're interested in creating like fictional maps for a book that you're writing or whatever, then you can go to Open Fictional Map.
I have kind of amendment. because actually open fictional map has some rules. You cannot, for example, they are expecting drawing countries objects that are not focused on fantasy. For example, if you wanted to draw Dragonland with actual dragons and I don't know 20 kilometers long trees, then you are actually not allowed to. They also have some rules. Also in OpenStreetMap maybe not go as far as there are no rules. For example, if someone starts vandalizing or mapping driveways as motorways and so on and refuses to stop, then they will be blocked.
There's already people moving on the stage here, so I think we have to move off. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.